Hi everyone, it's Mark here again. This is the fun part of my job, which is where I get to catch up with one of our full members and introduce them to you. So I'm delighted that Margaret Wesseling has joined me today. Margaret, thank you for joining me from Greece.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's just a pleasure to talk to you.
It's always good fun. Now we're going to have some fun in a moment. I'm going to create your fantasy cultural year from the answers to 10 easy questions. And I should point out to our viewers that you've had little warning of this, so this is going to be great fun. It'll be improvisation at its best, but it does produce some really nice anecdotes and stories quite often. But before I do that, I wonder if you'd be kind enough to introduce yourself to those who watch this on the website, the work you're doing, where you are, the kind of connections that you'd like to make.
Okay, I'm Margaret. I'm a poet and playwright. Recently, I've been focusing much more on the playwriting because it seems I just chose the form because it just seems to be a little bit broader. You can have two people talking instead of just having one voice, and it has more possibilities for interaction with people. Anyway, I've written 9 plays and I'm working right now on getting them put on in Athens, which poses difficulties because they're written in English and people here speak Greek, so they have to be translated and so forth and so on. And what I'm looking for right now is to see if I can make some connections in the English speaking world, so that to see if I can find somebody who would like to put on the plays in English. And that is difficult because if you don't have a personal contact with somebody, it's very hard to get them interested in your work. There's so much out there. There's so much going on. You need to have some kind of a personal contact. So I have personal contacts with Greeks, and I write in English. This is my problem. And yeah, so um, something. I mean, and I also like to do performance myself. I'm not primarily a performer, but I've learned a lot about it recently, and I find it just fascinating to see how words can become actions on stage. A couple of weeks ago, I did a performance of a an excerpt from a play of mine, and I got some really positive reactions from the audience. So that was really encouraging. And that time I did it in English, so you know that was great.
Great.
When I
It's always,
speak Greek, I sound like I'm talking into a box. It's like the accent. Oh my goodness, what are we gonna do?
yeah. Oh, that's great to add that kind of performance element to
Yeah.
what you're doing. That's really great. Well, wherever this appears, there'll be links to various things, reviews,
Mhm.
comments, and feedback that you might have got. So we'll do our best to make sure that this helps in your hunt to do that. But perhaps you could tell us, is there a theme, a subject matter theme that runs through your work, or what might the one that you're pushing to be performed? What is it about?
I mean, I tend to be quite interested in social issues, but this one is about animals. Really, it's about animals and human beings, interactions between animals and human beings, but also how incredibly like human beings animals really are, and how actually we are like animals as well. I mean, it goes the other way, you know. So it's a series of monologues in the voices of animals mostly, and I call it the crack because it's about the divide, or the dividing place, the crack between humans and animals, and how you can go move back and forth across that divide pretty easily. We're much more similar than we think.
Yeah.
And yeah, last year we did it on the street. We did it in all in some of the ancient temples of Athens, which are right next to a freeway, where you have to yell to make yourself heard. It was quite interesting, and I'm interested in seeing them put on stage. They're about characters and interactions between characters, I would say.
Great.
Yeah.
Sounds great. I'll ask you for links so that we can provide those in the profile that will accompany this interview so that people can contact you and find examples of it. So thank you so much for that. Now we're going to have some fun, a little bit unorthodox, but I'm going to take you on a year of cultural travel. And it'll be fun. Now we need to find a starting point. And the starting point for your fantasy cultural year is going to be a building.
Okay.
What's your favorite building in the world?
What's my favorite building in the world? Well, it would have to be like one of the medieval cathedrals that I studied at one point in my very eclectic career when I was a student. Some of the ruinous Cistercian monasteries, not a cathedral really, but they have some incredibly beautiful windows and things, and there's something about them which sort of seems to me it's almost like it's almost like a connection between us and the spiritual world, which is you just go there and it's different.
So is there one in particular that
Fountains Abbey comes to mind.
Fountains Abbey?
Yeah.
Okay. Where's that?
It's in the north of England. I forgot where.
Let's see if we can find it and show everyone, shall we? I'm going to find it on
a
the
long time ago, but the image is still in my mind. It's like those windows, up against the sky.
Fountains Abbey. Okay. Oh, wow. Right. I'm going to share my screen so that our viewers can see. I'll try and pull the images up. There we go. This is fun. Right. Can you see that?
Yep. Yep.
That's incredible.
It's incredible.
That is incredible. There's a company that uses drones with lights on them to fill in the gaps in cathedrals. So for example, this part here, they use drones with lights on to put the roof back on.
Yeah, to imagine how it must have been at some point.
Yeah, incredible. So where is this in the world? This is in where are we? This is in Yorkshire.
Yorkshire, yeah, that's the word I was thinking of, and wouldn't come to mind. Yeah.
Okay, so it's near a village called Aldfield, near Ripon in North Yorkshire. So to see where that is, if I click on here, for those who want to have a sense of where it is, there it is in the middle. There it is.
You really have to work to kind of get to some of these places.
Yeah, so this is
mostly raining, but
north of Leeds, south of Middlesbrough. There we go. Right, so we now know where you are. Okay, now I want you to imagine that it's a June day. It's 6 p.m. The sun is still shining, and you're sitting on the lawn outside the Abbey enjoying the view. And there's a kind of outdoor cafe there as well in the visitor centre. Okay. And there is a book on your right, and you've been enjoying the book. Now, that book is either your favorite book, it's either a recent discovery, or it's a book that has been with you all your life. What's Margaret's book on that table?
What's my book? My book is fictions by Jorge Luis Borges, and that's how I learned the name. But in English, it's Jorge Luis Borges. He's a South American, an Argentinian writer from the early part of the 20th century, and the things that he does are just so very short. He was a great writer that only wrote short stories, and they're full of mystery because he pared everything down to the essentials. And or maybe it's Labyrinth. There's two books, Labyrinth and Fictions, that I like. But he described labyrinths. He described things in which you must get lost, So that's like, and he had many of them, like the library that has all the possible books, the man with the perfect memory, the city in which everything happens, things like that. He used to like to invent paradoxes.
Wonderful. So there you go. You can have both of those books as a treat.
Mhm.
They're ready for you to, and you're sitting there with this wonderful view, summer, warm, 6 p.m. The sun is over the yard arm, as they say, and you can have a drink on the left of you. What would be the perfect drink in those circumstances?
Water, of course. What else would you drink in fountains?
Absolutely. Fountains Abbey.
Yeah.
Excellent. Now, you're feeling quite pleased with yourself because you've just come from a meeting locally in Ripon, in Yorkshire, where you met a wealthy northern family who are philanthropic, and they love the idea of research, international research. And given your playwriting skills and your passion for the arts and culture sector, they've asked you if you'd be prepared to spend a year in the country of your choice, studying the arts and culture landscape for them and bringing back some nuggets of learnings from another country that they can apply in England. Okay.
So I'm all the culture of the country, because like most countries have thousands of years of culture going.
Yes, you'll find out when I
It's
give,
hard to focus, you know.
but you have to choose one country and ideally one city in that country. So where would you want to explore more arts and culture? In what city would be a good one to it? They may send you on another one, but the first one they need to know about.
I don't know, Mark, because it's like I've been going on these wild goose chases all my life, you know. Like at one point I was very, very interested in medieval spirituality in England. That's from there, Fountains Abbey. And and then I was interested in Middle Dutch manuscripts from the 15th century. And if I had to answer right now, I'd say probably the south of France, but that's because I was there last summer, and it's just I noticed all these things which I would kind of like to explore more. But
I'm south of France is a wonderful choice. Okay, so which city or town or village would you like to be based in?
near Toulouse.
Toulouse. Okay, perfect. So um you're on the plane.
Hmm.
It's first class all the way. There's a generous fee involved for this year. They're giving you a luxury apartment in Toulouse for the duration. Um, and all your personal admin is sorted at home. And it's a wonderful sort of pivoting year. Now you're on the plane at first class, and um, it's not a long flight for you, really. The steward comes to you and gives you a note from the wealthy Yorkshire family who are funding your.
Saying, "Come back, you're spending too much." Well, they're from Yorkshire.
Well, yes, where there's muck, there's brass. Yeah. Um, they've said they'd like to study you while you're doing this, and one of the things they'd like you to do is to limit your musical intake to one very specific genre or type of music for the whole year, to the exclusion of all else. If you had to listen to one very specific type of music for a year, what would you choose?
Um,
Painful, isn't it?
yeah, it's terrible. I mean, because I just spent like a week or so. I just did a seminar in voice. I mean, I'm interested in producing my own voice, and so I mean, I guess pop music, because I ignored it when I was younger. I was into classical and medieval stuff, but pop music is really very interesting.
Yep. I've never ceased to be amazed that with only 12 notes and a finite combination of those notes,
Yeah.
there is still great new music being made. And
And all the new electronic means that they have for strengthening the voice and recording it, they've just widened the range so much, and they're interested in other things than they used to be. Whereas the roots are still, it's still popular music.
yeah.
They're doing incredible things with it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. So you get pop music's a good choice. It's quite wide. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
you've got that. Now, so you arrive in Toulouse, and There is a group of young people there who have been asked to welcome you and help you settle in and spend the first few days with you. This is a fantasy, so I can make this up, which is great. They're at the airport holding your name on a card. They usher you into a limousine, and they take you to the center of Toulouse. I don't know Toulouse terribly well, but they've given you a loft apartment in the center of Toulouse. But you have a butler and a cook if you wish, to help you. Now they ask you to settle in, unpack, rest a bit, and they'd like to take you to a dance performance. Okay, and because this is a fantasy magical mystery ride, you can have any dance performance you like performed in front of you. Now that could be any dancer with us or not, any style or any group. So what would you like to watch?
I mean, I really like modern dance. I think it's really very interesting, and I'm going to be using it in the performance, which is going to go up this fall of my play in Athens. It's very interesting to use in theater as well. Dance with the body, the movements of the body are a way of communicating emotions in them and of themselves, and you can see some incredible things. So
Yeah,
modern dance.
perfect. I had a conversation this morning with one of our members, and we were reminded of the lack of that many of the art forms that we are involved with don't require language, and
Yeah.
that put so visual art, sculpture, music, dance, architecture, our sector is unique in its lack of need of common language.
Yeah, and also when you try to start thinking of a link um, between language and other kinds of arts, it's very humbling, you know. Like in for instance, in performance, and in theater, and the other kinds of theater, you speak to people who are performers, and they say there's too many words there. We can only do a few because we have to do actions. So you have to, if you're going to want to put your words on stage, you have to be very careful. You know,
Mm.
you have to be and also very sparing of the words.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like doing a PowerPoint presentation,
yeah,
because I've learned this the hard way. And I only, wherever possible, have one word per slide so that I can talk, because otherwise people read rather than listen. And if you've got too much dialogue in a theatre production, they don't notice the nuances of the
right.
action.
The audience goes to sleep very easily.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so you've had your modern dance performance in this wonderful
Mhm.
theatre in Toulouse. And your friends have said, we'd like to take you to dinner, but you can choose the cuisine.
Mhm.
What national cuisine would you choose?
Well, we're in Toulouse, so I want, you know, Southern French food
Yeah, nice.
because really, wherever you go, if you eat the food that the ordinary people make every day and are used to making, it's almost always really good, you know, and really interesting,
Okay, so you're going to a kind of neo
traditional.
neo original French restaurant. I know
Yeah.
a lovely auberge, right?
Yeah.
Where I love the idea that in France, in some of those rural areas, they don't have menus, they have restaurants, and you get what you're given
Get
for.
what they're making. Well, that's pretty sensible. I mean,
Yeah,
why ask them
really
to
sensible.
cook
Otherwise, you've got
twice
to keep.
badly, you know?
Yeah, there is for that reason, there was a pizza place in Chicago who um, were struggling coming out of lockdown, and they changed tack. They only make one kind of pizza per day,
Mm-hmm.
so they don't have to hold all of this stock
Mm-hmm.
that some half of which they throw away.
Yeah.
So if you like ham and pineapple, it's Tuesday. If you
Mm-hmm.
like gluten free, it's Wednesday. If you like all the meats, it's Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been extremely successful, and their costs have gone down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think a similar restaurant in lockdown during the pandemic found that they weren't selling any pizzas because they were a restaurant and they were closed, but they realized that their ovens were hot enough to melt plastic. So they made molds and created masks for people to use. So they came out of lockdown with 2 business models. Anyway, I digress. Right. Now, tomorrow in Toulouse is Sport Day, and sport is considered by most to be part of the fabric of our cultural landscape. You can watch, you can take part, but what sport would you like to spend 2 hours watching or taking part in Toulouse?
I'm not so into watching sport, if you want to know the truth. I've never watched football, either the one they do in America or the one that they do over here. I like doing things personally, you know.
Okay.
So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe kung fu or something like that.
Kung fu.
They're so they're virtuosic in kung fu. They're just so their bodies are just so capable of doing so many things, you know.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, you can do kung fu. That would be great. I think your camera's slipping down, Margaret. We're gradually losing. There we go. Thank you. Now, tomorrow is Visual Art Day, and there is a rather special art gallery in Toulouse that has developed a virtual reality room that allows you to step into a painting and look around, move around, and check the parts of in the painting that you couldn't see because it was in 2 dimensions. You can choose any painting or any artist's work to step into. What would you want to step into?
I mean, maybe some of the paintings of Miro, but I don't have a particular one in mind.
Okay, Miro, you can step into a Miro. That would be great. Excellent. Now, to lighten the mood somewhat, next day they're going to take you to a play or a musical. Which play or musical would you like to watch?
Okay, I don't know. Oh, because I go to see so much theater. Can I take a rain check on that one? Nothing is coming to mind.
Okay. What about a film? Your friends in Toulouse have said, please take us to see your favorite movie.
My favorite movie right now is Dead Man by Jim Jarmusch.
Okay.
That is just an amazing movie. That is, I mean, and I've seen a lot of his films. I tried to see everything he made because I was so impressed by that one, but that one is kind of sticks out.
Dead Man by Jim Jarvis.
Yeah, Jarmusch, M-U-S-C-H, Jarmusch. He's an American filmmaker.
Okay. Jim Jarmusch. I'm going to have a look. I often put movies on late at night, so I might have a look at that tonight as I'm working.
I don't want to put that one on too late at night.
Okay. That's a hint. I love that.
It's not a really optimistic film.
Okay.
But it's incredibly beautiful.
I shall have a look. Now, the next day in Toulouse, we're calling Hero Day. And we've booked a Michelin star restaurant for you for a 2-hour leisurely lunch. And you can invite 3 other people. And they can be anyone, and they will come. So who would you like to have lunch with for a couple of hours?
Jan van Roosbroek from the Netherlands. John Frost from Spain. And who else? Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't think in terms of people so much, but what communities do. I suppose maybe Florence Nightingale.
Nice. That's a lovely combination. Yeah, love that. As you can imagine, we've had some strange choices over the last few months in that one, and you'll find those on the blog if you wanted to have a look. That's great. So that's Hero Day. Now we're approaching the end of your year, or the first week of your year, perhaps. And you get one of those days that come around infrequently for most of us. You know, from the moment you wake up to the moment you put your head back on the pillow, the day is entirely yours. All your personal admin is done and up to date. You don't feel guilty about not doing things. There are no family commitments or meetings or anything to prevent you doing what you want. Now, Toulouse, we can provide you with any form of transport you need. A guide, we can close museums or art galleries or theatres if you wish. What would you want to spend your day doing in Toulouse on a day like that?
Okay, so I'm going to take some transportation right out of Toulouse into the countryside and see if I can visit some of the medieval monuments and the places where the Cathars and the Albigensians held forth, and talk to the people around there and see what they thought about these movements, if they think of them at all. Because I'm interested more in like what ordinary people do and what it leads to than in the great people. I'm sort of, I mean, to me, like human society seems like a piece of cloth. It's woven together out of all kinds of different things. And I just sort of like going through the cloth and seeing how things are connected up, you know? And I think oftentimes, you know, we single out somebody as a great person, you know, and put their work in a museum, which is not wrong. Probably they were a great person, but then we miss all the connections between them and their uncle, you know, and their aunt and the person they met on the street, and all of those persons are also really great, you know, and also very important.
And and influence that work as well.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's a lovely day out. I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
So the year is up. You're on your way home
Mm-hmm.
back to Fountain Fountain Abbey.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, where you're meeting the family from Ripon who paid for your trip. They just want to have a half an hour casual chat with you about what you learned, so that's fine. On the plane on the way back, you get a note saying that the restriction to listening only to pop music has been lifted, and you can and you can listen to anything else you'd like. So other than something that would be considered pop music, what was the first thing you might like to listen to?
I don't know. I like classical music too, you know, Bach mostly.
A nice piece, yeah, Bach, lovely. So there you go. You're home. You've had a lovely year. The bank balance has been swelled,
Mm.
and no costs were incurred. I hope you've enjoyed your fantasy cultural year, Margaret.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I'm often asked to set up a travel agency so people can book this. So
Yeah.
so wherever this appears, it will be accompanied by a profile that will write about you, with links to your work and to contact details and such like. So thank you so much for doing this. Don't rush off, but for the benefit of our viewers, I just wanted to thank you for being one of our full members and being so active. And thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you, Mark. And it's really been it's been great talking to you. It's been a really interesting talk. And yeah, I look forward to more.
Thank you very much, Margaret.